But I think that's the kind of thing that they would be very interested in.
But come on, address the issue. Can this impact on the function of examiners or auditors?
Yes, it would. As I say, if you're defining a best practices set of policies, then these are the things that the regulators will be telling the banks that they should do and that they should look for.
Can you come up with a set of best practices as of this point that you could actually give to the FFIEC and say, examiners ought to be looking for this, which means then the bankers will be trying to do it?
Yes, at least a start in that direction, because I have said, here are the scenarios that you can expect to see. That's the 4 scenarios that I've described. And I have said, in those 4 scenarios, these seem to be the most important characteristics that people should look for in identity documents. So yes, yeah.
Moving back to
Sure. In your list of contracts,
Slide 20.
Either 6 or 20, doesn't matter which, or 22, I guess. What does low risk to security ratio mean?
Okay, the low risk to security ratio. That is a characteristic where I'm going to use my old-fashioned Florida driver's license as an example. That's the best way I know how to explain that. My old-fashioned Florida driver's license, it's considered high risk as far as an identity document is concerned. If I get away with a fraudulent driver's license in a bank, then the store is open. I now have access to rights, or assets that I shouldn't. So this is considered a high risk document, relatively high risk. The security on this old-fashioned driver's license is almost non-existent. There is nothing electronic on it. It has no holograms. This was damaged in Hurricane Wilma, and I received it at an Office Depot. I mean, it's just a piece of paper. I actually had one security person tell me they wouldn't accept this because it's not secure. So that risk to security ratio, this is a high risk document, low security, this would be a very high ratio. That's what that means. Whereas the new Florida driver's licenses have all sorts of, they have holograms, they have state seals, they're embedded in the plastic, and so on. Those are high security. So even though they're high risk, the ratio of risk to security is low, relatively speaking, on a new driver's license.
Okay. Do the banks have, presumably you get this expertise from somewhere?
Yes.
Does it come from getting burned, or do they have some training in place to help you if you're the person who's opening a new account? How do they gain this expertise?
Both. It's a matter of time. There is training, and there is there's some intuition, but there is some of being burnt involved. But then being burnt needs additional training. The reality, though, is that as fast as the banks, I think the president of one credit union summed it up very well. He said, Ken, we're in the business of borrowing and lending. That's what we spend most of our day thinking about. We have to think about identity-related fraud because it's a big risk for our industry. But the thieves spend 24 hours a day thinking about identity fraud. So we will never catch up with them. And as fast as we come up with things to try and minimize the risk, these are smart people. They're out there figuring out new ways to beat the system, and we don't have the time to keep up with them. But to answer your question, yes, it's a combination of being burnt. There is some training. There are policies in all of these organizations. Yeah. But it's a combination of all those things that leads to expertise.
So if your sample comes from 8 banks, is there additional clustering, statistical clustering amongst people from the same bank?
I didn't look at the clustering among people. That's also available, but I didn't look at that.
Because it seems like everything is based on consensus.
Of
And I'm kind of
Consensus with regard to the roles, instead
Right.
consensus with regard to the different characteristics, yes.
Right, right, so I'm kind of wondering how much of that consensus is due to bank policies, and how much of it is consensus across the banks versus across the people at the.
I have the information, I can certainly look at that and include it. I mean, I could include that as some of the discussion that we had. Yep, that would be good.
Okay. Richard? Richard?
Well, that was one of the questions I had, I mean, since there's a clustering effect, so at least to conceptualize it, I mean, you have a small sample, what is an artifact of the particular institutions and what you might expect to find if you could do a wider sample, at least just to conceptualize.
I think I probably would find, well, first of all, let me say, what I do recall from just looking at my data and so on, and because I did have that information, I didn't include it here. What I recall is that there really isn't that much clustering among banks.
Mhm.
What I could look at though is clustering as far as level of experience is
Yeah.
concerned. That might be something.
Different sorts of,
Yes,
strategies.
because I do have the data about the number of years experience that each person has that I talk to. So that's another factor possibly for clustering.
Or possibly in the type of institution, what.
Could be credit unions
Size,
versus
yeah.
merchant banks versus
Yes.
wealth management.
So you
Yes.
want to at least, conceptualize those sorts of things. Were there any, what alternative kinds of measurement did you consider along the way?
In terms of
You know,
measuring,
for your analysis here.
In terms of measuring the importance.
Yeah, I mean, when you have this, clustered approach here.
Yeah, I have the cluster approach. I also have just a simple rating of the, I have just the averages. So I have just a simple mean. Those are really the two things that I consider. I could have gone into some of the other methods, but I hesitated to go much further because I knew I had a small sample and it would be difficult for me to really